slasher
Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing a ARC reading vlog. Before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments, are you looking forward to these books? Are you adding them to your TBR? Let's talk about it. Alright, so as per usual, thank you to Netgalley and the publishers for giving me ARCs of these. I am so excited for both of them. First up is The Black Queen by Jumata Emill. This is a YA mystery thriller. In this small southern town, Nova has just been named the first Black homecoming queen for her high school. However, unfortunately, she ends up dying later that night, and we then follow both Duchess, who is her best friend, as well as 𝗖cie, who is believed to have killed Nova because she had been up against Nova as homecoming queen. Between this cover and the blurb mentioning for fans of One of Us is Lying, I had to request this one. Definitely am getting similar feels to The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. I assume that between the teenage drama and the murder, we're probably going to get some racial discussions as well, and I am definitely enjoying it so far. I'll say I'm already about 40% in, but we're not going to talk about my thoughts just yet. On the opposite side, I'm going to be reading Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the second book in the Lake Witch trilogy, which is following Jennifer Jade Daniels in her small town of Proof Rock, Idaho. I'm going to do my best to not have any spoilers for the first book, My Heart is a Chainsaw, but I can't guarantee anything. It has been 4 years since the end of the first book, and Jennifer is just now returning to her hometown. However, unfortunately for her, her return coincides with a giant blizzard and the escape of a serial killer. I actually just saw the fact that this had a musical reference title in Stephen Graham Jones and requested it. Did not realize that it was the next book in the Lake Witch trilogy, which I wasn't quite sure if I was going to continue. But thankfully I had already read My Heart is a Chainsaw for my October 5x5 last year. Put a link to that in the cards if you're interested for a review. But here's hoping that perhaps I might enjoy this one even more. Alright, so back to The Black Queen. As I was saying, I'm already about 40% into this one, and I am enjoying it thus far. Definitely feels like it is from the perspectives of teenagers. And while currently I do think that is a positive thing, the slang that is being utilized definitely makes me feel a little bit old, I'm not gonna lie. On the opposite side, I do think in the future it's certainly gonna age this book and might come across a little cringy. However, I do love the way that this starts with petty teenager drama and gossip. I got sucked in pretty quickly because of that. 𝗖cie, who was up against Nova for homecoming queen, comes from a fairly rich family in the area, and her sister, her mother, her grandmother, all were homecoming queens at her high school, so not being named is a big kick in the pants for her. However, with Nova being the first Black homecoming queen, it is quite a big deal that she has been elected. We never actually see from Nova's perspective, rather we see most of her through Duchess, her best friend's eyes. I do like Duchess thus far. Right out of the gate, as soon as Nova's murder is brought to her attention, she's determined to get justice for her best friend. Alongside the mystery though, we also see a little bit of Duchess's struggling relationship with her father because her dad is actually a cop in this town. The dynamic between them is definitely difficult, and through their relationship we see some thought-provoking discussions on Black police officers and the struggles they have, whether it be through the racial injustices they experience in the police force or the issues they come up against in their community with being a Black person as well as a cop, and even some of the issues that come about when trying to enact change from within the system. While all of those have come up, none of them have been particularly delved into yet, so I am hopeful those will be discussed a little bit more in the future. On the opposite side with 𝗖cie, since we're seeing through her perspective, I don't think she's the murderer, but that doesn't make her likable. But after you see her family situation, it kind of makes sense that she's the total worst. On one hand, her actions thus far do feel like they fit with a teenager who isn't thinking through the repercussions of what they're doing. But on the other hand, it's pretty hard to root for her when she's definitely making some very questionable decisions. Interestingly, we've actually learned more about the layers of Nova's character and some of the possible things that might have played a part in her death through Tinsley more than we have through Duchess, which I am a little shocked about. Thus far though, it does read pretty fast. I wasn't intending to read this far before updating you guys. It kind of just happened. And by this point, we're already starting to uncover a few clues, little breadcrumbs here and there. Thus far, they feel more like slices of bread because they're pretty obvious what they're leading up to. I'd be surprised if it's not what I think it is. And because of that, I am wondering if the twists and reveals are actually going to be shocking in this or not. Granted, I will say the thought process I'm following with the clues that have been laid out is a lot darker than I was initially expecting going into this book, so that's pretty cool, but I'm hesitant on how this is going to proceed. Hey guys, so I have hit like 75% into Black Queen, and honestly, I really need to film this update so I can finish that book out because it reads very quickly. I mean, I've been reading this in like 150 page sprints almost, and that's not intentional. Though, apart from that, I don't have the best comments for the last 30% I've been reading. I'm still enjoying Duchess. She's not always likable, I will say, but I think she's an interesting character to follow. She is very authentically herself, and I appreciate the fact that she is so dedicated to trying to find justice for Nova since she was her best friend. I actually believe they were best friends, especially seeing as how now that they've been investigating, Duchess is starting to feel like she didn't know Nova as well as she thought she did, and even with that, she still is not mad at her for keeping secrets. She's just wanting to find out what actually happened and who is responsible for Nova's death. I think that's very admirable. I talked about the fact that with Duchess's father being a cop, there was a great opportunity for diving into discussions of trying to be an officer, trying to enact change within the system while also being shunned by your community because you are a cop, and then at the same time trying to play the political ball game from the inside as a Black person. Little bits were talked about at the very beginning of this book. Duchess and her father get into a fight, and they basically have spent the rest of this book avoiding each other. We have seen nothing more about that, and I feel like it's definitely a lost opportunity. Tinsley. My God, I still cannot stand her. She thinks she is 10 times smarter than she actually is. Anytime she makes a little bit of leeway in the case, she like throws all of her energy into this one idea, and then she overplays her hand anytime she talks about it. I can't stand her. And I still think it's weird that we're finding so much information about Nova and her death in Tinsley's perspective rather than Duchess's, when Duchess was Nova's best friend. I still think that's pretty weird. Apart from that though, Tinsley is just insufferable. She constantly puts her foot in her mouth, which is just incredibly cringy to watch. But then other characters will call her out on whatever she said, which was ignorant, racist, straight up dumb. I get it, but on the other hand, it feels like the story is revolving a little bit too much around Tinsley being educated, and oftentimes that responsibility is falling on the shoulders of the Black characters in the story. We do also learn that Tinsley and Duchess do have sort of a complicated relationship. They were friends when they were kids, but because of something Tinsley's mom did, their friendship imploded. And then combining those last 2 points, oftentimes Duchess is the character who is educating Tinsley. It just seems really odd that she would be taking the time to do that when her best friend has been murdered and her focus is supposed to be on solving the case. Apart from that, as far as the mystery goes, every twist and reveal that has taken place so far, I have guessed quite early on, and I do have a theory for where this is going to go for a final answer. So I am a little concerned that this is just going to be really predictable, and I'm very sad about that. I'm sad that I don't have more positive things to say about this book because I was really intrigued going into it. Hey y'all, so I totally forgot that I needed to film this update. I finished out The Black Queen, and by the end of the book, it was just really obvious what happened, unfortunately. I genuinely think I called every single twist, turn, and reveal that took place in this book because none of them were well buried. Every single clue was quite obvious in my opinion. Like, part of me wants to give it the benefit of the doubt and say, well, it's a YA thriller, you know, it's not going to be as twisty and turny as an adult thriller, but I've definitely read YA thrillers that I haven't been able to do this with, so doesn't technically apply. By the end of the book, it was very, very obvious that Tinsley's perspective was more heavily favored. I wasn't really a big fan of that. I wanted more of Duchess because she was Nova's best friend. I enjoyed her character so much more as well. This book was so good in the idea, but the execution just was not well handled. Like, there were so many fantastic thought processes that had been laid out in this book, weren't really followed through. Like I said at the beginning, when it came to some of these reveals, they definitely were tackling darker topics that I was really anticipating in this book, but that doesn't make up for the fact that this was a really predictable mystery with a detective character that's very hard to root for. My call pile breakdown unfortunately came down to like a very low 3 stars. I like the idea of this book. I like the idea of the topics being brought up, but the execution just was not there, and I'm very sad about it.
Hey y'all, so I'm currently about 20% into Don't Fear the Reaper, and I am enjoying this. I like that Stephen Graham Jones is actually showcasing the repercussions of the ending events from the first book, specifically around Jade, but also just in regards to the town and the legend that has sprang up because of that event. It's gonna be kind of hard to talk about this book without spoilers, but I'm gonna do my best. We are seeing where all of the main players that survived in the first book are in their lives now, as well as just like what has become of this town, and as I mentioned, the legend, which is very interesting. And then we know that there is a new serial killer in town. We get a little bit of background from one of those like essay chapters, or at least in the first book, they were essays that Jade was writing to her history teacher for extra credit. In this one, I'm not sure who is writing them yet. But they do seem like they're essays or letters to a Mr. Armitage. Through those chapters, we get to learn about our serial killer this time around. He has basically terrorized multiple different states, all using different methods. And sometimes he would kill people via a brand, which is really hardcore. Other times he would hang them. He also has a hook for a hand, so I'm sure that's gonna get used at some point. I've just hit the point where we're starting to pull in some of those pop culture references to big name horror and slasher movies again, and I do enjoy that. That was something I really liked in the first book. Jade's obsession with slasher flicks, and she has sort of now passed that on to 𝗖cie, and I really like that they kind of can connect over this, even though Jade is trying to distance herself. Now they are 22, and Jade is instead going by Jennifer. I do think Graham Jones does a fantastic job of really writing like a person would think. It's very stream of consciousness. It kind of jumps around a lot, which sometimes can be a little confusing, but for the most part, I tend to enjoy it. We see a little bit from the first victim. We see from Jade, from 𝗖cie. We see from a police officer who is now in the force. We see from the police officer from the first book. Thus far, I'm feeling pretty positive, which I'm very glad about because I wasn't really sure if I was going to continue this series whenever I finished the first book, but I'm digging it.
Hey y'all, so I've hit the 35% mark now into Don't Fear the Reaper, and I am still enjoying it. I actually noticed that apparently majority of the chapters are actually named after different slasher movies, and that's fantastic. I don't think the first book did that. I'm not really sure, but I do appreciate that in this one. Speaking of slashers, Jennifer, or Jade as she's called in the first book, is definitely trying to distance herself from the traumatic experience that takes place in the first book. I feel like that's not too spoilery, but also the sort of character she had created for herself in high school to shield herself from the people around her. I like that for her. I like that we're seeing some growth for her, because in the first book, I really didn't know how to feel about her. I definitely felt like she fell into the trap of being a teenager in a horror movie where there's just certain situations where you should probably talk to somebody with more authority. And I like that in this one, she's kind of more aware of that, and she has gone to people who can take care of her, particularly since she doesn't really have anybody in her life now that she's gotten, almost said something spoilery. I also appreciate that she sort of has this father figure in the town's previous sheriff, And then now she has actually been trying to take care of a victim of this serial killer in the current book. The victim also has a sister who survived the climax of the first book. And the whole conversation was just very interesting. And it really made me start to wonder whether this is going to ride that line between being supernatural and not, just like the first book did. I love that. I love when that whole discussion comes up, and I'm really enjoying it in the horror book, especially since there is a total logical answer for all of the terrible things that have been happening in this one, namely the serial killer who has killed 35 people, I think, at this point, and has now escaped police custody. It makes total sense that all of these teenagers dying is because of him. But like, what if it's not?
Hey guys, I am still at about 46% in Don't Fear the Reaper. I am enjoying it. I'm fairly certain that majority of this book is going to take place in a single night. At least that's what it seems like so far. We are still alternating between many of the different perspectives. I do think Jennifer is my favorite. I like 𝗖cie, but there was this specific scenario. 𝗖cie was just a complete idiot. It was very difficult to read. Homegirl, if you're gonna watch a video to learn how to shoot a gun, maybe you should also watch videos about safety precautions. I will say the gory scenes are really badass though. I gotta say, Graham Jones definitely knows how to write really visceral, disgusting, stomach churning scenes. On top of that, I also am really liking the essay chapters. We're kind of learning background about Dark Mill South, the murderer who may have escaped and could be responsible for this massacre that's been taking place so far. Yet they also take the time to explain the different folklore that's gone on in this area and the possibility of the events that are taking place being connected to something from one of those stories.
Hey guys, so I'm about 80% into Don't Fear the Reaper, and I am really liking this. I definitely think thus far that I am enjoying this one even more than the first book in the series. Every time I continue reading, it is just so unsettling and creepy. The blizzard atmosphere is just oppressive. It never lets up. I've continued bouncing back and forth between whether what's happening is due to supernatural events or not. I love riding the line between those two. I love trying to piece together what is happening and whether it's actually all because of the serial killer or if there's something darker taking place. Thus far, I do think we have finally gotten a little bit of an answer to that. And the way it was unveiled, pretty clever. I actually really enjoyed it. I had to go back and reread what happened just to make sure I understood. Seeing as how final girls were such an important element and piece of discussion in the first book, now at this point they are really coming center stage, getting all of the attention, and I'm enjoying that so much. The pop culture references have expanded slightly to actually include things that aren't horror and slasher, but I do like that there was a mention of, what's that movie? Ready or Not with Samara Weaving, and Jade sees the movie and she's like, I don't know what this is, but she looks like a badass and like she's about to kick ass and take names, and I really enjoyed that movie, so I really appreciated the comment and then the connection with the final girl thing. So good. Those pop culture references were also used in a clever way whenever we were seeing from the perspective of a few teenagers in the town, which I think we've seen from two just random kids. And with those, I was a little concerned that we were starting to see from a few too many perspectives, but I do think they've been used properly so that they actually are providing more suspense for the events that are unfolding that our main characters, our main little group of people aren't actively seeing, or at least not yet. And with that, Graham Jones does a fantastic job of introducing you to every single character you see from very quickly. Doesn't matter whether you see from them once or multiple times. Each time you see from their perspective, you totally understand and can really feel their personality within the writing, and that's so impressive. Like I was saying, we have our main cast of characters who are really at the center of the entire story. It's bigger than in the first book, which I enjoy because that means there's more chances of them protecting one another and taking down the serial killer. But on the opposite side, that means there are more people on the chopping block, and I know Stephen Graham Jones, he could hurt me. I'm really surprised at how much I've come to care about Jade and 𝗖cie because I felt as though in the first book I ended that one feeling sort of ambivalent about them. I liked them, but I wasn't nearly as endeared to them as I am now, and I'm very impressed. Hey guys, so I officially finished out Don't Fear the Reaper, and while I'm not super surprised that I enjoyed this, based on my feelings for the first book, I am a little shocked that I loved this one so much. Like I've been saying before, we definitely spend so much time bouncing back and forth between the paranormal and the not. There are some events in the climax where it's just like, that cannot be real. Then it comes back around and you're just like, oh, okay. Also, when it comes to the climax, there are a good number of twists that took me on a ride I was not expecting. And then I just sat back and thought about, wow, the writing around that was so incredibly clever to make this so surprising. Like I was saying before, final girls were definitely becoming the center of attention at the end of the book, which really made this feel so true to the slasher movies that are constantly being referenced. All of the pop culture references were clever and well incorporated into the writing, which I'm not surprised because I really enjoy Stephen Graham Jones's writing, but it is kind of hard to follow at times. There's definitely some of these where if you know, you pick up on the reference, and if you don't, you're probably not going to realize what he's talking about there. With talking about those references, it's hard not to think about Jade or Jennifer as a character. In the first book, I felt pretty ambivalent about her. I pitied her, but I didn't particularly love her as the protagonist in the story. 𝗖cie, I felt pretty similar on, but in this one, I loved both of them so much. I was cheering for them. Anytime they were going up against the big bads, I was right on the edge of my seat. I could hear that final girl scream echoing in my ears. I think part of what made me love Jade or Jennifer so much in this book is we really get to see her growth from where we first met her in the first book, and that's why I cared about her so much more. I really had seen how she had changed. I could definitely sympathize for her. I felt so bad for some of the awful experiences she has had to deal with, but then that just made me root for her all the more going up against these bad guys. The first book definitely held back on the actually horrific events until probably the last 30%. Not this. The horror truly spans throughout the entire book. There are some particularly stomach-churning scenes that I had to pause and try to bleach my brain of them, but it hasn't happened yet. Those are going to haunt me for the rest of my life, I can tell you right now. At the same time though, as disgusting as some of these deaths were, are also so impressive because every single one of them stands out. They're always different. None of them are as simple as a gunshot or a stabbing. No, they are creative and makes each of them stand out even more than the last. I also think that's really clever on Jones's part because those really creative deaths perfectly fit with the campiness of slashers, where some of these are just so incredibly over the top. It works so perfectly with the entire theme of this series. This was a great follow-up to the first book, and I am incredibly curious to see what's gonna happen in the third. In the end, I had to give this one 4 stars. Like I said, I was a little surprised that I liked this so much, but also not. Stephen Graham Jones is one of those authors that seems pretty divisive, but across the board, I think for the most part, all of his stuff works really great for me. Hey again, so while I was gathering my footage, I realized that I actually never filmed an exit for this video. Thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!